Gracious Father, I know it's cold outside, and it's going to get cooler as the days go by. But here, Father, you have provided us with this beautiful sanctuary where we can come and praise you and worship you. And we are excited because we know that what a day that will be when we get to heaven. What a day that will be when we can see you face to face, when we can be with you. Even when we can ask you some tough questions, we long for that. Our eyes are aimed towards eternity, not just towards a limited lifetime. So, Father, right now, I pray, Lord, that you may take this service, this worship service, to the next step and just guide us during the next few minutes. Help us, Lord, focus. Help me personally focus on what I need to say. I have many thoughts in my mind. I pray, Lord, that you may clear them and truly structure, organize my mind and help it flow, the message flow out, knowing that it's a message comes from you and not a message that I prepare. I pray, Father, for those that are not here today. Lord, bless them. You know their reasons. Some are grieving, some are sick, some are traveling, some are just, Lord, unsure of their spiritual journey. All of them, Father, I pray that you may bless them and that they may feel your presence in their lives. Be with us, guide us, open our hearts, open our minds for the next several minutes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, well, we continue our series on connecting the dots, and we are trying to really understand why there's so many different events in the Bible, how they intersect, but above all, we are trying to understand God's plan of salvation. And sometimes we forget that there is more happening behind the scenes that we can't see. Sometimes we overlook details of God actively, intentionally doing something on our behalf. So it's good from time to time to remind us what is happening and where our aim should be. And so we started a few weeks ago talking about heaven. And in the first sermon, we talked about rebellion, how rebellion started in this perfect place. We talked about how God handled that rebellion with patience, with kindness, for a time. But then he became protective, and he needed to protect the angels that were still faithful to him. And so God then had to act. And we talked that rebellion many times begins due to a lack in trust. And so in heaven, what we see is rebellion versus trust. Then we stretched the line and we got our dot number 2. And here we talked about sin, how sin entered earth, how sin became part of our reality, from a perfect world to an imperfect world. And we talked about Eve, we talked about Adam, we talked about the sneaky snake, we talked about all of that. But the emphasis on that day is really the promise that God made. The promise that one day there will be somebody that will come to rescue us. On that day, God did not say, I'm going to punish you forever. I'm going to blame you for everything that is happening. On that day, God is saying, I'm going to provide you with a solution. And so, sermon number 2, we looked at those dynamics in the Garden of Eden and how God stepped up even before he was asked. And then we stretched another line, and this was last week. And last week we focused on brokenness. We focused on how world has experienced brokenness. You would expect things to get better after, what happened in the Garden of Eden. After Adam and Eve see what they have done, you would expect that they would regret and turn around. But the reality is that it got worse and worse and worse, to the point where God had to intervene to try to deal with that brokenness. And so we focused our attention on all these moments that deal with brokenness. And we can see them where this brokenness is not just for here, for earth, but actually begins there in heaven. We have a broken trust that happened in heaven that then led to brokenness entering our world through doubt. These cause broken or fractured relationships, which ultimately multiplied to exponentially to the rest of the world, to all of us. God grieves, and we look at that with a broken heart. And we also talked about this brokenness survived even after reset. Even after the flood, when God thought, let me start again, still brokenness was there. It shows up, brokenness, as a fear-driven independence at the Tower of Babel. And this brokenness also presents himself, also follows people even after deliverance. And if you're following the timeline, this is about the Exodus, the children of Israel leaving Egypt. Finally, brokenness appears even in God's redeemed people. When God says, you will be my people and I will be your God, and right after that, let's worship a calf, a golden calf. That's what they're doing. So brokenness becomes part of the relationship. Brokenness becomes part of the reality in this world. But as we talked about last week, we see God that gives second chances. We see a God that does not walk away just because things get hard or because he's upset or because he's mad at us. We see a God that gives second chances. Now today, we're going to stretch another line, we're going to connect another dot, and we're going to talk about something very interesting that we probably should talk more in our churches. God moves into the neighborhood. And we're gonna see how this happens. We're going to see why this happens. You see, this is part of the plan of salvation. This is all the progression that is happening as part of the plan of salvation. Now, after the golden calf, after the incident over there, the Israelites could have asked a very simple question. Is God finished with us? I'm tempted to say, I'm actually going to say, that this question makes sense. Is God finished with us? After all, they had just heard God give them the Ten Commandments, and sure enough, after they said, we will do everything, we'll do all of that God asked us to do, now they are worshiping another idol. And so yes, God had his moment with Moses, and we talked a little bit about this, where God invited Moses to engage into a mediating role. But God said, I will reestablish my covenant with them. And yet the question still lingers. Is God finished with us? Or if you want, we can even ask the question a different way. Did we finally go too far this time? I remember a church member that I had, whenever came to communion, he would never take part of communion. And one day I engaged him in a conversation We're friends, and we start talking. And I asked him, what is going on? And he was like, no, what I have done is so bad. I'm not worthy. I cannot take part of communion. That's the same question. Did we finally go too far this time? And I told him, you know what? What you're actually telling me is that God's sacrifice, Jesus' sacrifice, was not enough for you. And that is not right. That is wrong. And it's interesting that his mindset actually changed. He became one of my elders, one of my best elders. And so it was, when properly framed, things changed, things transformed. But on their case, they're living a reality where the question makes sense. Let's look at their reality a little more in detail. They're standing at Sinai. They're seeing God expressing himself in thunders and lightning. They have God's voice, in a way that we cannot even conceive, we cannot even imagine. They have watched lightning and fire tear across the sky. I mean, it's beautiful at night when you go out and you see these lightning. I mean, it's imagined. But now try to think of it just located on top of a mountain, time after time. There's a manifestation that is, it's not natural, it's beyond that, it's divine. And they're looking at that. And they're scared. They are scared. So they beg Moses to speak to God instead of them. We are scared of this God. We understand that he's holy, but we are scared of him. And the reality is that they understand that, but they also know who they are. They also know their limitations and their failures. They know that they are just slaves who had been freed from Egypt. They know that they are uncertain or unreliable, if you want to use that word. They know that they are impulsive. They panic easily. And above all, they know that they have failed. So the question makes sense. The question is not just a random question. Yes, that's God, but this is who we are. And when the focus turns inward to us, then we ask those questions. Is God finished with us? Have I gone too far this time? Most certainly they have heard of what happened in heaven and the outcome of what happened there in heaven. Lucifer was cast out. They probably heard that Adam and Eve were also driven out of the garden. They probably heard that Cain was sent away after he killed his brother. For sure, they heard that the flood destroyed a violent world. They know Babel scattered humanity across earth. They watched Egypt collapse under the plagues. They saw an army swallowed by the sea, and they trembled when the mountain shook with fire. So this is the image they have in mind. They are aware of these events. They have heard of all of this. Lucifer broke relationship with God. He was punished, cast out of heaven. Adam and Eve, they disobeyed God. They were punished out of the Garden of Eden. Cain killed his brother. He was punished, sent away from the family. Mankind are not getting any nicer, any better. Let's kill them all. Oh, we want to be just like God because we don't trust God. Okay, then I'm going to send them all away. I'm going to confuse them, disperse them throughout the world. The Egyptians, the Pharaoh does not want to let us go. Very good. Let's send plagues. Thousands will suffer. Thousands will die. Oh, there's an army coming after us. Oh, that's okay. God's going to kill them all in the sea. So the Egyptians are living this reality. And you know, the interesting thing is that, humanly speaking, we tend to focus more on the negative information than on the positive information. Yes, they can say that the flood also, in the flood, God spared the family because He wanted to protect the timeline. Yes, we can say that. Maybe they also said that, yes, Babel had to happen to limit evil. Yes, maybe they could reason and argue that. Or Egypt was warned again and again to let them go. Maybe they can reason with that. Or that God spoke and said that He will carry them on eagle's wings. Yes. But again, the reality is that as human beings, we are more prone to remember the negative stuff. Right? I tell my wife, she is not hysterical. She is historical. Because time after time, she brings things that happened a long time ago, I don't even remember. And usually those things are not good things. You know, usually they imply something I did wrong. But that's the human mind. That's who we are. We tend to focus on the negative things. We tend to focus on the things that happen and the things that were bad for us as human beings. So they're struggling to trust the Lord. They're struggling to understand who God is. They do not yet know Him deeply, granted. They're still trying to learn. But they keep on breaking this relationship. And so it comes to the point where they just say, when people rebel, God moves away. That's their expectation. Even though God has proven time after time that that's not going to be the case, because we are so focused on the negative things that happen, our minds just kind of think that way. We have done wrong. God does not want anything to do with us. He's going to move away from us. That is their reality. That's why the question, is God finished with us, makes sense. That's why the question, have we gone too far this time, is expected. Because they are focused on the negative things. But then, something unexpected, beyond what human beings would even imagine. That's why the Bible has to be a special book. Because we cannot even imagine these kind of things. Something strange then happens. God speaks to them and says, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. Whoa. Wait a second. Wait. This means, what does this mean? Let them make me a sanctuary? Okay. For what purpose? You see, many times when you look back in history, sanctuaries, temples, shrines, they were built to honor some god. They were built, in many cases, to show off their skills, to show off how much wealth they had and they could put into building those buildings, maybe to show off how powerful, quote unquote, their God is. They were not built for their gods to dwell in them. Maybe they built them up on a hill where everybody could look at awe. But God says, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. You see, religion, let me put it on the screen. Religion often tries to move people toward God by awe, distance, and spectacle. This is religion. This is not relationship. This is religion. But God does something completely different. He asks for a sanctuary. He's not asking for a fortress. He's asking for a sanctuary. And here's the most crazy thing. He tells them, place a sanctuary in the middle. Not up on the hill, not outside the camp, right in the middle, where the dirt is, where the dust is, where the children run around, where the noise, where people gathered. Put the sanctuary right in the middle. I don't know about you guys, but this is not normal. But so far, from the last several sermons, from the last previous sermons, we have seen that God does not behave in what we would consider as being normal. God behaves in a God way. Let's put it that way. In his own ways. And so he asks them, don't build me a fortress. Don't build me a temple that is inaccessible to the common people. I want to be where the common people are. I don't want to have a temple there where only the elite ones, the rich ones, can go. I want to be where the common people are. In the Garden of Eden, God spoke to them. God walked with them, actually. At Sinai, God spoke. But now here, God is wanting to live. God is moving in. God is not saying, come, find me if you're worthy. That's not what God is saying. Instead, he's saying, I am choosing to live where you already are. You see the difference about God? He finds us, he meets us where we are. He's not expecting us to be rich, wealthy, holy. He's not expecting us to become saints before we can meet him. He comes and finds us where we are. The sanctuary is not about God elevating himself above the people. It is about God lowering the distance between himself and the broken people. You see, that is critical. The sanctuary is not where people can come and just bow down. This is God. No. The sanctuary is not about people doing that. The sanctuary is God telling them, I'm here for you. I'm here to stay with you. And that totally changes dynamics. Because when you have the question, are we done? Is God done with us? When you leave your religion based on fear, your relationship with God based on fear, then you have a hard time relating to God. So God is saying, okay, I get it. Then let me take a step further. I'll come down and I will be with you guys. So religion is not about God lowering, it is about God lowering the distance between himself and the broken people. Now this word sanctuary, we when we look at the scriptures, we find that in the sanctuary, whether in the desert or then in Jerusalem, the sanctuary fulfilled many duties, many purposes. Place of gathering. It was considered even a hospital, place where people would come and look for treatment, to seek some treatment, to be healed. The sanctuary had different functions, different purposes. But here, God is presenting a new level, a new idea of the sanctuary. This is not primarily about architecture. The sanctuary is about refuge. It's about safety. So when you are afraid of God, you struggle to come and meet him where, according to human minds, where he might be. And so God is saying, I want you to have access to me. So God tells him, build me a sanctuary, build me a place of refuge where you can safely come and connect and interact with me. It is a place where someone who is afraid can come near and not be destroyed. God is saying, you don't come here to impress me. You come here because you need me. You see, that's what happened when we come to church. We don't come to church to impress God. If that's the only reason, might as well just stay home. We come to church because we need him. We come to church because we worship him. We want to develop a relationship with him. So God is saying, you don't come here to impress me. You come here because you need me. And this is the idea of sanctuary, creating a place where they can feel safe and where they can find refuge, where they can connect, where they can develop a relationship with Jesus. At the same time, sanctuary was implemented with some very interesting elements. The sanctuary will include sacrifice, blood, prayer, intercession, mediation. This is God's way of saying, I already know you are broken. I already know you are broken. And I know you will fail again. That message applies to us every day. At night, before you go to bed, you have your prayers and you may say, God, forgive me for my sins. The next day, it's a new day, right? And he knows that we are going to fail again. He knows that we are broken people, and he knows that we're going to reject. We're going to break the relationship with him. However, he's saying, I am making room for that. The sanctuary is also a place where I understand who you are. I understand the impact that sin has had in your life. I understand that your promises only carry so far, only go so far. I get that. But that's okay. That's part of the sanctuary. That's why I want the sanctuary to be there in the middle. That's why I want to be in the sanctuary among all of you. So I am making room for that. God is building into their life with him a system that says failure will not automatically end this relationship. Grace will stand in the gap. Remember the question. Have we gone too far? Because we keep on failing. Because we keep on walking away from God time after time. God is saying, failure will not automatically end this relationship. Grace will stand in the gap. Grace will stand in the gap. So, God said in Exodus 25, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. And then he says, a few chapters later, I will dwell among the people of Israel and will be their God, and they shall know that I am the Lord their God who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. And then he adds on again in Leviticus, and he says, I will make my dwelling among you, and my soul shall not abhor you, and I will walk among you, and will be your God, and you shall be my people. What God is saying is that it doesn't matter how far you go from me, I will still be here. That's what God is saying. It doesn't matter how many times you break this relationship, I will still be here. It doesn't matter if you reject me, I will still be here. That's what God is telling them. He knows, but he oversees that. He overlooks that because he wants to be with them. God is using the sanctuary to teach them, to show them who he is. They just came out of slavery. 400 years in slavery. Now God is saying, this is who I am. And I want to be with you. Not up on the mountain, but right in the middle where everybody can see me. Where you all have access to me. So when we look at the sanctuary, when we read the Bible and we look at the sanctuary, it feels like something strange. It feels like something odd, something weird. But the reality is that the sanctuary is so far beyond that. It is so much more than that. The sanctuary, it's like a mini gospel condensed in a building and with everything that happens around it. The sanctuary is central to understand the plan of salvation. So as we go through this series, obviously, we needed to talk about this. We needed to talk about the sanctuary. So, now the question is, if God is holy and people are still broken and fear has not disappeared overnight, okay, so if God is holy, perfect, and people are still broken, then how can God stay in the middle of the camp without compromising who he is? How can God be in the middle of the people without compromising who he is? Without compromising his attributes, without compromising his divinity, without compromising his holiness and his divinity? Well, that's a fair question. And maybe we don't have the right answer. Because again, we're trying to answer a question that only God can answer. But I think we can look back into the scriptures and look forward into the scriptures and realize a couple things. One thing that I want to mention is that God adjusts his methods to meet people where they are. God adjusts his methods to meet people where they are. God walked with Adam and Eve. God spoke from the mountain. Now God is adjusting again so he can teach them, so he can guide them, to meet them where they need him the most right now, which is in the middle of them. They need to build trust. They need to build a relationship. God's not going to walk away from that. He's not going to seclude himself from that. He's going to come down and be right in the middle of them. So God, what we see is God throughout the scriptures adjusting the way he relates to human beings. Always with the same purpose, eternity. But to get there, he adjusts the way he relates to us so he can simplify it and we can have a relationship with him. The sanctuary is not a contradiction of Eden. It is Eden pursued. Think about it. What happened in the Garden of Eden? Adam and Eve doubted. And the consequence of that was, keep going with your life somewhere else. Right? Again, our minds that are so used to put the negative things first, will probably focus on that. But in the Garden of Eden, you have a relationship that was broken. You have a relationship between people, mankind and God, that was severed, that was crashed, that was broken, that was destroyed. And God wants to fix that. He wants to fix that relationship. He wants to restore that relationship. So he says, yes, you are no longer part of the Garden of Eden, but I'm going to come down and be with you. is not a contradiction to Eden. It is Eden pursued. It's God trying to do again what happened or was what life was in the Garden of Eden. The sanctuary is not a retreat from holiness. It is holiness finding a way to stay near broken people without destroying them. It's not God retreating from holiness. It's not God saying, okay, I'm not going to be holy anymore. No, it is God, it's holiness finding a way to stay near broken people without destroying them. God does not lower his standards. As I mentioned before, he lowers the distance. God does not lower the standards for us, but instead, he comes and he joins. The sanctuary is not God stepping back into symbolism, and we're going to look at that in next, but it's actually God stepping closer through mercy. I love them. I want to have a relationship with them. I'm going to be in the middle of them. So, this is a nice drawing of what the sanctuary looked like at the time. Just a drawing, okay? There's details, they're not there, because sanctuary was actually a work of art in and of itself. But let's look at the sanctuary as a movement. And maybe try to put yourself, as a bird watching from above, because it is very interesting the different elements and what they actually mean. And just for sake of reference, I have here a study that amplifies what we're talking about. I made copies to share, so make sure you take these home. As you understand, we don't have time to look at all the Bible verses. So that's why I built this a little study on the side. We have only a limited amount of time. But let's look at the sanctuary here. Let's start with step one. People come to the courtyard. Now the courtyard it means that you are welcome to come. You had fans all around, but in the middle it was kind of open. People could come in, and you're not going to be left out based on your social status, on your wealth. I mean, they were all slaves. They were all poor, right? You're not going to be left out if you're a leader or if you were just a beggar. Everybody was welcome to come. And so the courtyard, in many cases, became a place where people would just hang out with each other. People would talk to each other. The courtyard is open, not hidden. And this is God's first message to a broken people. Access. Not to a distant God, but to a present God. A God that is right in the middle of them. Everybody has access now to God. You can bring your guilt, you can bring your fear, you can bring your failure, you can bring your questions. But come. Come. Don't shy away. Come. That was the first step, the courtyard. Then we transition to what happens next in the courtyard, to the altar. And the altar represents something that will stand in your place. That's what the altar represents. Something that will stand in your place. Sin is not nothing. We need to remember that God is not lowering his standards. Sin is still a big thing. So sin for God is not nothing. Sin is important. Brokenness has a cost. But God is making a way. Sin is not nothing. Sin is important. Brokenness has a cost, but God is making a way. The altar is where the reality becomes visible. A substitute, an innocent life given so the guilty can live. Now, this is a representation, yes. But this is a deeply spiritual representation that demonstrates the impact and the consequences of sin. And at the same time, demonstrates the plan of salvation to them. Substitute an innocent life given so the guilty can live. God is basically teaching them three important things. You don't fix this by pretending it didn't happen. You don't fix this, or you don't fix sin, by trying harder. None of that will happen. You cannot do that. You fix this because I provided a way. It's not about you. It's about me reaching out and providing a way so that one day we can have this relationship again. We can mend this broken relationship. So now from the altar, we move further back, and now we move to the laver. And this amplifies what happens at the altar. You are not only forgiven, that happens at the altar, but now you're also made clean. You see, saying that I repent, God forgave my sins, I'm baptized, and then going on with the same lifestyle, doing the same things that I used to do before, it's not part of the whole idea of having a relationship with God. Because we're forgetting the part of the transformation, the transformation that happens when we start this relationship with God. And here that is visible. You are not only forgiven, now you start this process of becoming, of being transformed. God is not only interested in canceling guilt. Forgiveness is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of restoration. Forgiveness is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of restoration. That's why it's not biblical, the concept that once saved forever. That's not a biblical concept. The laver teaches God doesn't just remove the penalty. He begins to remove the stain. He begins the cleansing, the restoration process. And so that's what he represents, that big basin with water. Then from here, we walked inside the sanctuary. And inside the sanctuary, as you can see there's two chambers, the holy place and the most holy place. So again, let's look at them a little more in detail. Step 4 is the holy place. This represents the daily relationship. This represents human beings being able to have a relationship with God. Here the message changes from crisis to communion. Everything here is about connection. The light reminds them that God guides. The bread reminds them that God provides. And the prayers rising remind them that God listens. It is about relationship. It's about connection with God. And so you're coming from the outside, and now you're leaving the crisis behind, and now you continue on this transformational process where now you are connecting. You are engaging in a relationship. And then from here, we enter in step number 5, which is the most holy place. And this is God's presence, safely. Now here, this is a tricky one, because 99.999% of the people would not be allowed to enter this place. Only one person would be allowed to enter into this place. So the sanctuary is not only about access, but it's also about representation. The high priest was the only one that would be allowed once a year, and after he himself has performed some rituals of purification, he would be allowed to enter into the most holy place. And he would do so representing the entire community. The priest represents the people because the people are still learning trust, still healing. They're still afraid. They still don't know God. So the priest is saying, okay, that's okay. I will go there in your place. I will represent you there in your place. God is teaching the people, you are not alone in this approach. We are together in this. Someone can stand for you. Someone can carry you into my presence. Go to the book of Revelation. What do we read there? What will Jesus do there, right? Representing us, standing in our presence, being our advocate, right? You see how the sanctuary mirrors the plan of salvation in itself. The sanctuary, summarized, moves like this. From the courtyard, where anyone could come, you move to the altar, where forgiveness is provided. Now, from the altar, you move to the laver, where cleansing is offered, and from there to the holy place, where daily relationships is nurtured, and then to the most holy place, where God's presence is approached through representation. That's the sanctuary in a very summarized nutshell. This is where the sanctuary mirrors the plan of salvation. It begins with invitation. Come. It confronts the reality of sin, having a substitute. It offers cleansing and transformation, made clean. It restores relationship as a daily walk, light, bread, prayer. And it points toward the goal, God's presence. That's the goal. That's why God said, make me a dwelling, a sanctuary, that I may dwell in the middle of them. You could have this relationship with God. Now, last week we talked a little bit about the law. And is there a conflict between the law and the sanctuary? Could we say that the law does not match the sanctuary? Well, of course, you're all going to say no. But maybe we're not so sure of that. So I'll say, yes, you're correct. The law does not have a conflict with the sanctuary service, sanctuary rituals. They actually complement each other. They actually support and help, quote unquote, each other. The law tells Israel what love looks like. This is what we talked about last week. We're connecting the dots, remember? The law tells Israel what love looks like. Now, the sanctuary, let me pull it up here. The sanctuary shows what God does when love breaks. You see the difference there? The law tells people this is what love looks like. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie. Do not covet. But the sanctuary says when you break that love, this is what God's going to do. The law names what healthy relationship is supposed to be. He shows us what a healthy relationship is supposed to be. Well, the sanctuary is God's way of keeping relationship alive when people fall short. Which happens time after time. That's why God says, I made room for that. I know it's going to happen. But look, this is what the sanctuary means. So, in the middle, in the most important place in the sanctuary, we find this object, which is known as the Ark of the Covenant, right? Inside the Ark of the Covenant, what do we find? The law of God, right? The Ten Commandments, right? And interesting that on top of the ark, there's what? The mercy seat. And now you see that law and mercy go hand in hand. Law and mercy are compatible, not competing with each other. Journeying, walking together with each other. The law describes the goal. The sanctuary describes the rescue. The law points to life as it was meant to be lived. The sanctuary shows the way back when people wandered. The law defines love. The sanctuary demonstrates love. The law shows us who God is. The sanctuary shows us how God stays. I came to stay, and I'm not moving anywhere, God says. I mean, when we read those verses, that's basically what it says. So now you have the law and mercy going hand in hand. Remember the slide I showed you before. The consequences of sin are not washed out. God still holds them dearly, and he is still concerned about that. That's part of the law. But the sanctuary provides a solution for that. That's part of mercy. They go hand in hand. They are compatible. So you see the law, vertical and horizontal relationships, and the sanctuary amplifying that and showing us how the vertical and horizontal then should be applied. So, what does this reveal about God? How do we see God in the sanctuary? And understand that we have flown over this idea of the sanctuary. We could be here many Sabbaths just talking about the sanctuary. I had to really just give you tidbits here and there. But what does this reveal about God? Well, it reveals a God who chooses proximity over distance. A God that chooses to be near us and not away from us. It reveals a God who moves towards sinners, not away. Think about the sanctuaries. Think about the movement. You go into the courtyard, from the courtyard to the altar, from the altar you go to the laver, from the laver you go into the most holy, to the holy place, and then into the most holy place. Every movement is taking you closer and closer and closer to God. You're drawn inward, you're drawing towards Him, not away from Him, not in a different direction, but this movement draws you closer and closer to God. A God who refuses to abandon relationship. It doesn't matter how messed up you are. It doesn't matter what you did, what your past was, what you're going to do tomorrow. I'm still here. I'm still going to be faithful to the covenant I established with you. And that's why I want to dwell in the middle of you guys. A God who builds mercy into the very structure of life with Him. Mercy is that key element that binds it all, that brings it all together. So, today we connected one of the most important dots that we find in the Bible. Today we try to see now that God has acknowledged the sin problem in the Garden of Eden, has made a promise, has realized the consequences of sin, not that He was not aware of that, but has worked through those consequences and now has decided to be intentional or even more intentional in building this relationship with us, coming down and being with us. We don't have this sanctuary, quote unquote, here. We don't have the Ark of the Covenant here in our church, but we still have what it represents, direct access to God. That's why the prayer time, we want to make it more intentional, because that's the part where we connect, we relate to God. I want to encourage you today, make sure before you leave to come and take one of these, and as you go home, just go over these Bible verses. Just study them, meditate, think about them. Next week, we're going to continue with connecting the dots. Thank you.